In a world where love is a performance and every whispered secret can shatter dreams, one woman finds herself at the crossroads of passion and betrayal. Subscribe now for more gripping tales. Then step into the story of Aisha, a woman whose wedding day becomes the stage for a revelation that will redefine her destiny. Aisha stood before the full-length mirror in the softly lit bridal suite, her reflection bathed in the tender glow of early morning. The intricate lace of her wedding dress shimmered like the delicate petals of a rare flower, each stitch woven with dreams and memories. Today was the day she had long envisioned since she was a little girl, twirling in her mother's vintage gowns, imagining a fairy tale romance that would one day sweep her off her feet. As she ran her fingertips along the delicate embroidery, the excitement of this new chapter mingled with a quiet, unspoken unease. The absence of her parents, lost to a tragic accident when she was only 24, left an indelible mark on her heart. Their love had been her guiding light, and now, as she prepared to exchange vows with Todd, the man who had so gently rescued her from despair, Aisha felt both the beauty of possibility and the haunting echo of loss. Her mind drifted to memories of childhood laughter, shared secrets in sunlit gardens, and the comfort of a home filled with unconditional love. Yet, the bittersweet reality of their absence tugged at her soul. Across the estate, preparations were underway with precision and luxury. Every detail, from the lavish floral arrangements to the carefully curated playlist, had been meticulously planned by Todd's family. Their world was one of opulence and tradition, a world in which Aisha was about to play an integral role. Despite the glitz and glamour, a subtle chill crept into her heart as she recalled whispered conversations and the reserved glances exchanged by Todd's kin. Was she merely a token in a larger game of status and expectation? Still, as the clock ticked steadily closer to the ceremony, Aisha embraced the hope that had sustained her through years of grief and self-doubt. Each step toward the gathering of guests felt like a defiant act of faith, an assertion that love, in its purest form, could overcome even the harshest realities. With a final deep breath, she turned from the mirror and walked out into the corridor, her heart beating like a drum heralding the beginning of an uncertain future. In that moment, surrounded by the soft murmur of excited voices and the gentle rustling of satin, Aisha allowed herself to believe in the power of new beginnings. She smiled, not just for the sake of appearances, but because somewhere within her, a spark of determination glowed. Today was not just a day of ceremonial rites and family expectations. It was a day to reclaim her destiny. Unbeknownst to her, however, hidden currents of secrets and whispered warnings were already stirring beneath the surface, destined to reshape everything she thought she knew about love, loyalty, and self-worth. As she stepped into the waiting arms of her wedding party, the weight of her past mingled with the promise of the future. Each stride down the corridor felt laden with both beauty and burden, for while the day sparkled with the allure of a fresh start, it was also the prologue to revelations that would test the very core of her being. And so, with hope and trepidation intertwined, Aisha took her first step into a future that was as breathtaking as it was uncertain. Just as the celebratory buzz began to fill the air, the heavy oak door to the bridal suite creaked open, heralding the arrival of Eleanor, Todd's mother. Dressed immaculately in elegant neutrals, Eleanor's presence was commanding and measured. Her eyes, cool and calculating, swept over Aisha with an inscrutable expression. For a moment, the room fell silent, as if time itself hesitated before the impact of her words. "Today is indeed a momentous day for you," Eleanor began, her tone gentle but laced with a subtle edge that sent a shiver down Aisha's spine. She paused, letting her gaze linger on the carefully arranged details of the wedding dress, the delicate pearl earrings, and the silver hairbrush that had once belonged to Aisha's late mother. In that silent pause, a storm of unspoken thoughts passed between them. Aisha felt a pang of vulnerability, as if the woman's scrutinizing look was peeling away the layers of her carefully constructed facade. Eleanor's next words, measured and deliberate, cut through the fragile hope Aisha clung to. "But you must understand, my dear, that marriage is not merely a union of hearts. It is a commitment to a life of expectations, responsibilities, and sometimes hard choices. Todd comes from a world where tradition and ambition dictate every step. Love, while important, is but one facet of this intricate tapestry. Aisha's heart clenched as Eleanor's warning resonated in her ears. She tried to maintain a composed smile, yet inwardly, doubt began to fester. The lavish surroundings that once seemed to herald a new beginning now appeared as gilded chains that might bind her to a destiny not entirely of her choosing. Was her love for Todd enough to defy the weight of his family's expectations and the hidden traditions that whispered of compromise and sacrifice? Eleanor's gaze softened ever so slightly, as if she were offering a final, cryptic piece of advice. Prepare yourself for the reality that awaits after today, when the initial enchantment has faded and the true nature of our world reveals itself. I do hope you prove me wrong, but know that life is complicated, and not all is as it seems. The words hung in the air like a dark cloud, casting a shadow over the joyous occasion. Aisha's mind raced as she struggled to reconcile her own dreams with the harsh implications of Eleanor's caution. The memory of her parents' gentle wisdom battled with the stark reminder that this union was not solely about romantic idealism, but about navigating a labyrinth of expectations and unspoken rules. In that moment, the celebration transformed into a crucible, one that would test the limits of her resolve and her ability to forge her own path in a world that seemed determined to dictate her every move. As Eleanor's footsteps receded down the hall, Aisha felt a lingering chill, a subtle warning that the future held secrets and struggles beyond her control. Determined, yet fragile, she gathered her courage and resolved to hold onto the love that had carried her thus far. Even as doubt crept into the corners of her mind, she vowed to embrace the day with grace, while silently preparing herself for the challenges that lay ahead. For now, the wedding continued as planned. But beneath the veneer of celebration, a quiet storm was gathering, a storm that would test the strength of her heart, challenge her ideals, and force her to confront a truth that had been lurking in the shadows. And so, with Eleanor's words echoing in her ears, Aisha stepped forward into the unfolding drama of her life, caught between the promise of love and the harsh reality of expectations. The ceremony unfolded in a breathtaking display of grandeur. Against the backdrop of a sprawling estate with manicured gardens and towering oak trees, every detail had been orchestrated to perfection by Todd's family. Yet, as Aisha stood beneath the floral arch, reciting her vows, she couldn't shake the feeling that the day was not entirely hers. The ornate venue, the elegantly arranged seating, and even the carefully selected classical string quartet spoke not only of refined taste, but also of a carefully curated narrative, one in which she was cast as an accessory to a much grander performance. Todd's gaze, warm and steady, met hers as he spoke words of love and promise. His eyes shone with an intensity that, for a fleeting moment, convinced her that they were partners in this new life together. But as she looked around at the sea of well-dressed guests, many of them part of a world that felt as distant as a dream, Aisha sensed an undercurrent of formality and detachment. Every detail had been chosen by someone else, every moment meticulously planned to reinforce a tradition that was not entirely of her making. As the officiant's voice rose and fell with solemnity, Aisha's thoughts drifted. Memories of simpler times, of shared laughter in the quiet corners of her childhood home, were replaced by the polished veneer of an aristocratic celebration. The luxurious European-inspired menu, the high-end decor, and the carefully staged moments all clashed with the warm, rustic memories of her own upbringing. The music, a refined medley played by a string quartet, stirred little in her soul. Instead, it evoked a sense of alienation, as if the very soul of the celebration belonged to a world that was not hers. A heavy weight settled on her chest as she realized that every element of the day was designed to honor Todd's heritage. His family had chosen the venue, the food, and even the style of the ceremony. There was no trace of the intimate, heartfelt celebration she had once envisioned, a wedding that reflected her own journey, her own struggles, and her own triumphs over loss and hardship. Instead, she found herself performing the role of a bride in a story that was not entirely hers, a beautiful performance in a play directed by someone else. In the midst of her internal turmoil, Aisha clung to the belief that Todd's love was genuine. She tried to recite her vows with the same passion that had once filled her heart, determined to focus on the promises they had made to each other. Yet, as the words left her lips, they felt hollow, echoing against the grandeur of a day that seemed staged more for optics than for genuine celebration. The carefully orchestrated moments that had led her to this altar now served as a painful reminder of the sacrifices she had made, sacrifices that had gradually chipped away at her sense of self. After the ceremony, as guests showered them with congratulatory smiles and sparkling champagne, Aisha retreated briefly into herself. In the quiet moments between the clinking of glasses and the soft murmur of conversation, she wondered if she had lost something essential along the way. Had she traded the authenticity of her own dreams for a role in a spectacle crafted by others? As the golden sunlight filtered through the estate's ancient trees, she felt as if the very world around her was whispering a truth she was not ready to accept, that the wedding, for all its beauty, was a carefully constructed facade, a union more about tradition and social expectation than about the true, raw bond of love. In that reflective silence, Aisha's heart ached with the realization that the day, though visually stunning, carried a deeper sorrow. It was a celebration of appearances, a day when every moment was measured, every emotion curated to fit a narrative that did not fully belong to her. And yet, amidst the bittersweet feeling of being an unwilling actor in a grand performance, she resolved to search for the truth hidden behind the glitz and glamour, determined to reclaim her own voice in the story of her life. Later that evening, as the reception transitioned from formal ceremony to a more relaxed celebration, the atmosphere began to shift in unexpected ways. Laughter and chatter filled the lavish banquet hall, yet Aisha felt increasingly isolated amid the convivial crowd. Guests, many of whom were clearly from Todd's world, mingled with an ease that underscored their shared history, a history from which Aisha was markedly absent. As she tried to immerse herself in polite conversation, she couldn't shake the nagging sensation that she was being observed, analyzed, and measured against an unspoken standard. The turning point came unexpectedly when one of Todd's groomsmen, a tall, broad-shouldered man named Spencer, clapped Todd on the back with a mischievous grin. "All right, Todd," he boomed jovially. "Here's your final challenge for the night. Show us you can handle a little culture shock." With a flourish, he pulled out his smartphone and began scrolling through a playlist of upbeat hip-hop tracks. The room erupted in a mixture of raucous laughter and good-natured teasing. Todd's eyes lit up in amused defiance as he accepted the challenge, while Aisha's heart sank with each mocking laugh that punctuated the moment. Aisha forced a smile as the crowd cheered on Todd, yet inside she felt the sting of humiliation. The tradition, a so-called test of the groom's willingness to adapt, was meant to celebrate progressiveness, but to her it felt like a game played at her expense. It was as if her very identity, her culture and heritage, were being reduced to a punchline in a joke that was as callous as it was cruel. Every beat of the music that followed felt like a reminder that her presence in Todd's world was less about mutual love and more about fulfilling an image, a prop in a narrative designed to impress his elite circle. Todd, ever the charmer, obliged with a well-rehearsed dance move that drew both cheers and polite applause. But for Aisha, the moment was bittersweet. As Todd danced, his confident smile masked a truth she could no longer ignore. She was not entirely embraced for who she was, but rather for the progressive image he needed to project. The laughter around her grew louder, and with each passing second, Aisha's internal conflict deepened. Her thoughts swirled with questions of authenticity and belonging. Was her love enough to overcome the systemic biases that permeated every conversation, every jest made in hushed tones among the guests? Retreating to a quiet corner of the hall, Aisha's eyes brimmed with unshed tears as she tried to steady her racing heart. The celebration, which should have been a tribute to love and unity, had transformed into a stage for a performance that demanded she play a role far removed from the person she truly was. In that silent space away from the clamor, she realized that every joke, every playful challenge, was a reminder of the cultural chasm that separated her from Todd's world. It was a chasm that could never be bridged by a single act of defiant joy. For the rest of the reception, While guests returned to their animated conversations and the dance floor pulsed with energy, Aisha moved like a shadow among the revelers. Her laughter was forced, her smile fragile. Every time she caught the knowing looks exchanged among Todd's relatives and friends, the ache in her heart deepened. In that moment, Aisha understood that she was not a celebrated bride in her own right, but rather a token in a carefully orchestrated display of acceptance, a display that prioritized optics over genuine connection. The realization, painful and raw, ignited within her a determination to reclaim her identity, to challenge the narrative that sought to define her solely by her difference. As the night wore on and the music reached a crescendo, Aisha resolved that this spectacle, as dazzling as it might seem to others, was not the conclusion of her story. It was only the prelude to a larger, more personal struggle, a struggle to assert her worth beyond the shallow validation of appearances. With every mocking laugh and every dismissive glance, she silently vowed that the performance was over. The game played at her expense had sown the seeds of an awakening, one that would soon lead her down a path of truth, heartbreak, and ultimately, liberation. In the aftermath of the playful yet painful challenge on the dance floor, Aisha found herself wandering away from the throng of well-dressed guests to a quieter part of the reception hall. Dimly lit corridors and secluded corners offered her a brief respite from the constant barrage of laughter and music. Here, in these hushed spaces, she began to overhear conversations that were meant for private ears only, a collection of whispered remarks and side comments that, together, painted a disturbing picture of how she was perceived. A group of Todd's relatives had gathered near an opulent side table, their voices low and conspiratorial. As Aisha approached silently, one of them remarked in a tone laced with both amusement and condescension, "Marrying a black woman isn't just a love story. It's brilliant PR. Todd knows exactly what he's doing." The statement, uttered casually as if discussing the weather, hit her like a sledgehammer. Each syllable dripped with the implication that her presence was not born of genuine affection, but was rather a calculated move to enhance the family's image. Another guest chimed in with a mocking laugh. "Yes, it's all about appearances. He needs someone to prove he's progressive, someone exotic to charm the business world." The laughter that followed was not warm or inclusive, but hollow and dismissive. Aisha felt as though the room's temperature had dropped dramatically. The very thought that her marriage could be reduced to a marketing strategy was a betrayal of the love she had once believed in. Heart pounding, she inched away, seeking shelter behind a column draped with delicate floral arrangements. In that brief moment of solitude, every whispered word replayed in her mind, each one amplifying the gnawing suspicion that she was nothing more than a prop in a larger, orchestrated spectacle. The realization that she had been objectified and commodified, valued not for her heart or her spirit, but for what she represented to Todd's family, cut deep. It was a revelation that felt as if it had been hidden in plain sight, and only now was it fully dawning on her. In the quiet, Aisha allowed herself to confront the bitter truth. The carefully curated celebration, the lavish details of the wedding, and even Todd's charming demeanor all seemed to be part of a performance designed to convey an image of progressiveness and modernity. Yet behind that veneer lay a network of prejudices and unspoken judgments. Every whispered comment, every dismissive chuckle, confirmed that she was an outsider in a world that valued her only as a symbol of diversity, a token meant to deflect criticism and elevate appearances. Determined not to let the cruelty of those words shatter the remnants of her self-worth, Aisha retreated further into a quiet alcove near a grand window. Outside, the night sky stretched vast and indifferent, its stars silent witnesses to the unfolding drama. In that reflective solitude, she questioned not only the authenticity of her marriage, but also the very notion of love itself. How could love thrive when it was constantly undermined by the expectations and prejudices of a world that saw her only as an accessory? The painful clarity that emerged from these whispered conversations ignited a simmering resolve within her. If love was to mean anything, it would have to be built on truth and self-respect, not on the shallow metrics of appearance and social advantage. Slowly, Aisha began to gather her thoughts, each revelation adding a piece to the puzzle of her identity. The beauty of the night, the softness of the moonlight, and even the distant hum of celebration all combined to form a stark contrast with the harsh reality she now faced. As she pressed her hand against the cool glass of the window, she vowed that the painful truths she had overheard would not define her. Instead, they would serve as a catalyst for a deeper understanding of herself, a realization that her worth was not measured by the approval of others, but by her own courage to stand against injustice. In that silent moment of introspection, as the echoes of whispered disdain faded into the night, Aisha resolved that she would reclaim her narrative. No longer would she allow herself to be a mere ornament in someone else's performance. The whispered conversations had stripped away the illusions, leaving her with nothing but raw truth, and it was in that truth that she would find the strength to forge a new path, one that honored both her heritage and her dreams. After the reception's initial clamor faded into a background hum, Aisha found herself drawn to the promise of a private moment, a brief escape from the relentless scrutiny and the echoing whispers of the night. Earlier that day, with hope still burning in her heart, she had planned a surprise, a romantic honeymoon dinner designed to recapture the intimacy that had once defined her love with Todd. The setting was meant to be secret and personal, a quiet table beneath a canopy of soft fairy lights, set away from the prying eyes of the grand estate. Yet fate had a cruel way of unspooling carefully spun plans. Late that night, when the festivities had given way to the soft murmur of tired conversation and the clinking of glasses, Aisha crept from the reception hall towards the secluded corridor leading to the bridal suite. Her heart beat in a hesitant rhythm as she recalled the surprise dinner she had arranged, a final effort to salvage the intimacy that had been slowly slipping away amid the orchestrated extravagance. With each step, the weight of the day's revelations pressed on her, a mixture of hope and trepidation that made her breath catch in her throat. As she reached the quiet corridor, a muted conversation drifted to her ears, voices she recognized but did not expect to hear in this intimate hour. Slowly, she approached a partially open door and pressed her ear against the cool wood, straining to catch every word. Inside, Todd's voice was low, conversing with a woman whose tone was laced with derision. "Do you really think this marriage will last?" the woman asked, her words imbued with a bitter laugh that resonated with the emptiness Aisha had felt all night. Todd's reply was dismissive yet unsettling. "That's not the point." The finality in his tone sent a jolt of betrayal through Aisha's heart. For a long, agonizing moment, she stood frozen in the shadows, absorbing the revelation that the private promises of their love were now reduced to casual, almost callous conversation. The words echoed in her mind, a confirmation of every doubt, every whispered comment, and every subtle hint that had suggested their union was built on something far less than genuine affection. The romantic surprise she had planned now felt like an ironic echo of the disintegration of trust. Her stomach clenched as the realization took hold. This marriage, which she had entered with hope and vulnerability, was in fact a stage for a performance. The private conversation revealed a truth that cut deeper than any public slight. The knowledge that Todd saw their union not as a sacred bond, but as a strategic arrangement, a means to elevate his status and satisfy family expectations. In that moment, the romantic dinner she had arranged, intended to rekindle a spark, became a painful reminder of the chasm between appearance and reality. Aisha retreated silently from the doorway, her heart pounding with a mixture of grief and resolve. The secret she had overheard was not just about the durability of their love. It was about the very foundation of their relationship. It exposed the cold calculus behind the warm smiles, the curated charm, and the carefully constructed facade that had defined her new life. The intimate space she had hoped to share with Todd had been tainted by the revelation that, in his eyes, their union was a transaction rather than a heartfelt commitment. With trembling fingers, she closed the door and slipped back into the quiet solitude of the bridal suite. The room, once filled with the promise of a private celebration, now seemed to suffocate her with the weight of a truth she could no longer ignore. As the soft glow of the fairy lights flickered over the empty table, Aisha resolved that the coming hours would force her to confront not only the disintegration of her marital dreams, but also the strength she had to find within herself. Tonight, in the silence of heartbreak, a spark of determination was ignited, a promise to reclaim her identity and her future, even if it meant tearing down the carefully built illusions of the past. In the hours that followed the shocking revelation of Todd's casual conversation, the dark velvet of night seemed to wrap itself around Aisha like a shroud. Alone in the bridal suite, she sat on the edge of the bed with trembling hands and a mind swirling with betrayal and sorrow. Every memory of tender moments shared with Todd now felt tainted by the harsh reality that had seeped into her life. This union, once full of promise, had become an elaborate facade concealing secrets too painful to ignore. The silence of the room was overwhelming. In the stillness, each creak of the floorboards and distant hum from the estate resonated like a heartbeat of an indifferent world. Aisha's eyes, glistening with unshed tears, wandered over the remnants of a day that had promised forever. The delicate lace of her wedding dress, the carefully chosen accessories, and even the soft glow of the fairy lights, all now stood as cruel reminders of the illusion that had been shattered. She realized that behind the carefully orchestrated perfection of the day, there lay a cold truth. Todd's love was not the sanctuary she had believed it to be, but a calculated instrument designed to serve his ambitions. Her mind replayed the conversation in excruciating detail, the way Todd had dismissed the woman's question with a nonchalant, almost rehearsed tone, the way his words had drifted into the darkness of a confession she never wanted to hear. The betrayal was not in a single utterance, but in the cumulative realization that every promise he had made was measured, every smile calculated. The hurt seeped into her bones, and in the solitude of that dark room, Aisha felt the crushing weight of loneliness and disillusionment. Yet amid the heartache, a spark of resolve began to flicker. The betrayal that stung so fiercely also awakened in her an inner clarity. For years, she had fought to be seen and accepted, not as a symbol, but as a person with dreams, desires, and a soul worth cherishing. Now, as the night deepened and the reality of her marriage became undeniable, she recognized that the time had come to reclaim that part of herself. Every hurtful word, every subtle sneer that had been masked as humor, fueled the determination to rise above the performance that had defined her existence. Slowly, Aisha rose from the bed and walked over to the window, where the inky black sky was pierced only by distant stars. She thought of the life she had built despite the odds, a life forged in the fires of loss and tempered by resilience. The betrayal, as bitter as it was, could not undo years of strength and survival. Instead, it ignited within her a defiant desire to no longer be complicit in a charade that diminished her true worth. In the solitude of that dark hour, Aisha made a silent promise to herself. She would not allow the cold pragmatism of Todd's world to dictate the terms of her life. She would confront the truth, however painful, and forge a new path defined by authenticity and self-respect. Though the wounds of betrayal were fresh and the night long, she felt the stirring of a future where her voice and her dreams would matter more than any carefully crafted illusion. With one final, determined glance at her reflection in the window's glass, a reflection now marked not by tears, but by a fierce glimmer of resolve, Aisha understood that the betrayal in the dark was not the end of her story, but the beginning of a new, courageous chapter. The truth was painful, yet it was also liberating. It was a call to action, an invitation to rediscover the strength that had carried her through years of loss, and a challenge to reclaim her own destiny in a world that had never truly seen her. As the hours turned into an agonizing vigil, the bridal suite became both a sanctuary and a prison for Aisha. The early glimmers of dawn had yet to break, and the night stretched interminably before her. Unable to find solace in sleep, she lay awake on the edge of the bed, her thoughts a relentless torrent of heartbreak, regret, and a burgeoning resolve. Every tick of the antique clock on the wall seemed to echo the passing of opportunities, moments lost in the performance of a marriage that was rapidly unraveling. Aisha's mind roamed over the events of the day like an endless loop. The warm smiles, the elegant decor, and even Todd's gentle caresses now appeared as part of a carefully rehearsed script. But behind the bright veneer, she had uncovered a hidden narrative, one of manipulation, hidden agendas, and cold calculations. The revelation of Todd's nonchalant conversation had shattered her illusions, leaving her with nothing but the raw, aching truth of betrayal. Each memory of the day was now intermingled with the painful recognition that the love she once believed in was an illusion, a performance intended to placate expectations rather than to nurture a genuine, heartfelt connection. In the dim light of the pre-dawn hours, Aisha's eyes grew heavy with the weight of unshed tears. Yet, despite the sorrow, she felt a stirring within her, a quiet defiance that whispered of a future where she would no longer be confined by the role that had been forced upon her. The sleepless night became a crucible, melting away the remnants of a past that was defined by fear and longing, and forging in its place a fierce determination to seek truth and reclaim her identity. Every so often, she would rise from the bed to pace the length of the room, each step a small act of rebellion against the oppressive silence that sought to keep her subdued. At the window, she watched as the sky began to lighten, the first hints of a new day promising that even the darkest nights must yield to dawn. And in that slow, inevitable transformation, Aisha recognized that the sleepless hours were not wasted. They were a time of reckoning, a moment when she could gather the shattered pieces of her heart and decide what to do with them. By the time the sun's rays finally broke over the horizon, casting a gentle glow into the room, Aisha had resolved that she would not allow the agony of the night to dictate the course of her future. The pain was a reminder of what she had lost, but also of what she could still reclaim: her dignity, her self-worth, and the promise of a life lived on her own terms. In that fragile morning light, she made a silent vow, a promise to rise from the ruins of betrayal and to seek a love that recognized her as a person, not a prop. With the new day came a confrontation that Aisha had both dreaded and anticipated. The soft chime of the doorbell resonated through the stillness of the morning, and as Aisha reluctantly opened the door, there stood Eleanor. The woman's posture was as impeccable as ever, her dark eyes calm and inscrutable. In that moment, the tension between them was palpable, a collision of two worlds, one rooted in tradition and ambition, the other in raw, personal truth. Eleanor's voice was smooth and measured as she stepped inside, closing the door behind her. "Aisha, my dear," she began, her tone both gentle and unwavering. "I know that last night was difficult for you." The words, though softly spoken, carried the weight of finality. There was no room for negotiation, no space for empathy. Eleanor's presence was a reminder that the performance of the wedding was far from over, that the expectations and responsibilities of Todd's world would continue to press down upon her. "You must understand," Eleanor continued, her eyes never leaving Aisha's, "that this marriage is not simply about the love you share with Todd. It is about joining two families, two legacies, and upholding traditions that have been passed down for generations. Todd's ambitions extend far beyond personal happiness. They are intertwined with duty, reputation, and the future of our family. I only wish to prepare you for the realities that will come, for life is not always gentle or forgiving." Each word was deliberate, delivered with the calm certainty of someone who believed that their way was the only way. Aisha felt a surge of anger welling up, mingled with sorrow and defiance. How could she be expected to simply accept this cold, transactional view of love? Yet, as Eleanor's gaze bore into her, there was also a hint of pity, a silent acknowledgement of the emotional cost of defying expectations. "I have seen many hearts break," Eleanor said quietly, "and I have learned that sometimes love alone is not enough to sustain a marriage in the face of harsh realities. I want you to be strong, not just for Todd, but for yourself." For a long, tense moment, the room was filled with nothing but the sound of their breathing, a fragile standoff between two very different visions of what a life together should be. Aisha's mind raced with the weight of Eleanor's words. In them, she heard not just caution, but a veiled ultimatum: to conform, to accept the transactional nature of this union, or to risk the inevitable backlash of a world that was determined to keep her on the outside. Yet, beneath the stern admonitions, Aisha sensed an opportunity. Eleanor's push, however harsh, had forced her to confront the reality of the life she was about to lead, a life in which she was expected to sacrifice her identity for the sake of appearances and tradition. As the conversation stretched on, Aisha's defiance grew. She realized that she could no longer allow herself to be molded by the expectations of others. If this marriage was to be a part of her future, then it must be built on her terms. A future where love, truth, and self-respect held sway over legacy and ambition. By the time Eleanor's measured lecture drew to a close, a heavy silence had settled between them. Aisha's eyes shone with a mix of sorrow and resolve. "I understand what you're saying," she replied softly, "but I also know that I cannot lose myself in this process. I must find a way to be true to who I am." In that quiet exchange, the final push from Eleanor became both a burden and a catalyst, a turning point that would force Aisha to confront the stark truth of her situation and to decide whether to play the role set before her or to break free and forge her own path. In the wake of Eleanor's final admonition, Aisha found herself at a crossroads where the echoes of her past and the uncertain promises of the future collided. The events of the previous night, the whispered betrayals, and the cold practicality of Todd's world all converged to awaken something long dormant within her, a fierce, instinctive desire to reclaim her identity. As she walked through the quiet corridors of the estate in the soft light of morning, each step felt like an act of defiance against a destiny she had never chosen. Memories of her mother's gentle wisdom came flooding back, words spoken in moments of comfort during long, challenging nights. "Baby, when something doesn't feel right, trust your heart," her mother had said, a phrase that had guided her through darker times. Now, as she pondered the stark realities of her marriage, those words resonated with an urgency that could no longer be ignored. The intuitive voice inside her urged her to see through the illusions that had been so carefully constructed and to recognize that her worth was defined not by the expectations of a privileged few, but by the truth of her own experience. The path ahead was shrouded in uncertainty, yet Aisha felt an undeniable clarity rising within her. She recalled the moments when Todd's smile had once filled her with hope, only to realize later that his charm was but a veneer covering ambition and convenience. The painful recognition that their union was a transaction, a well-rehearsed performance meant to bolster family reputation, stung deeply. But even as her heart ached, she felt the stirring of a resolute determination. She could not, would not, allow herself to be reduced to a mere symbol, a stepping stone in someone else's grand design. As she paused in a quiet alcove overlooking the gardens, Aisha allowed herself a moment of raw introspection. The beauty of the estate, the meticulously trimmed hedges, and the soft rustle of leaves in the gentle breeze seemed to mock the cruelty of a world that valued appearances over authenticity. In that moment, she realized that her instincts, those quiet, persistent urges to be true to herself, were the very essence of who she was. They were a reminder that even amid the glare of superficial splendor, the true measure of a person lay in their heart, in the choices they made when no one was watching. With a steadying breath, Aisha resolved to listen to that inner voice. The realization was liberating. The life she was meant to lead was not one dictated by the rigid expectations of Todd's world, but one that honored her dreams, her struggles, and the person she had fought so hard to become. No longer would she hide behind a smile or conform to a role that diminished her. Instead, she would seek out a future where love was defined by honesty and mutual respect, where her voice, soft yet powerful, could shape her destiny. In that quiet morning light, as the estate slowly awakened to another day, Aisha made a silent promise to herself. She would no longer allow the whispers of doubt or the weight of expectation to hold her captive. Her instincts, honed through years of overcoming loss and adversity, would guide her as she navigated the uncertain road ahead. And though the future remained shrouded in mystery, she felt an inner strength that reassured her. She was ready to forge a new path, one where her identity would be celebrated and her choices honored. By mid-afternoon, the oppressive tension of the past hours had reached its breaking point. In the hushed intimacy of the suite's parlor, Aisha found herself face-to-face with Todd, a confrontation that had been building silently for far too long. The air was thick with unspoken words and the heavy residue of betrayal. Todd's eyes, once warm and inviting, now held a guarded coolness that sent shivers down her spine. In that moment, the delicate threads of their once shared love began to unravel before her eyes. Aisha's voice trembled as she broke the silence. "I heard you talking last night," she said, each word laden with both hurt and determination. Todd's response was measured, almost rehearsed. "You know I love you," he insisted, a smile that didn't reach his eyes tugging at the corners of his mouth. But to Aisha, those words rang hollow, a pitiful echo of promises made in the absence of truth. The room seemed to shrink around them as Aisha pressed on, her emotions swirling in a tempest of anger and sorrow. "Then what does this marriage mean to you?" she demanded, her tone steady despite the tumult within. "Is it about us, our love, or is it about appearances, ambitions, and a role I never agreed to play?" The question hung in the air, heavy and charged with the weight of everything unsaid. Todd's eyes flashed with a mixture of indignation and regret. For a moment, he appeared to search for the right words, but the truth had already been laid bare in the echoes of whispered conversations and half-truths. "I never meant for you to feel insignificant," he murmured, his voice softening as he struggled to bridge the growing chasm between them. Yet every attempt at reassurance only deepened Aisha's sense of betrayal. In that fraught space, every memory of shared laughter and tender moments was re-examined under the harsh light of reality. The dreams they had spun together now felt like fragile illusions, easily shattered by the weight of expectations and the cold calculations that underpinned their union. Aisha realized with a painful clarity that she had given her heart fully, only to find it treated as an accessory, an ornament to be displayed and then discarded when it no longer served a convenient purpose. Tears welled in her eyes, not of weakness, but of fierce sorrow for the love that had been compromised by deceit. "I want to know who you are, Todd," she whispered, her voice cracking with raw emotion. "Not this carefully constructed image, not the man who is only here to fulfill someone else's plan." The confrontation was no longer just about a single conversation. It was about reclaiming the truth of her existence. Todd's silence in response was more damning than any rebuttal he could offer. The room filled with a heavy, suffocating quiet as the finality of their situation settled over them like a shroud. Aisha's heart pounded with the painful realization that the man she once believed in was now a stranger, someone whose love had been diminished by ambition and convenience. And in that painful moment of clarity, she knew that the time had come to make a choice, to either continue living a lie or to risk everything in the pursuit of a life defined by honesty and self-respect. In the aftermath of that painful confrontation, as the weight of unfulfilled promises and half-truths pressed upon her, Aisha reached a quiet, irrevocable decision. That night, with the lingering darkness outside echoing the turmoil within, she gathered her belongings with deliberate care. Every fold of fabric, every piece of jewelry, was a symbol of a life that had been constructed by someone else, a life that no longer held any truth for her. With a final, trembling breath, she stepped out of the bridal suite, leaving behind the ornate decor, the glittering facade, and the man who had never truly seen her. The early morning air was cool and liberating as she made her way to the car. Each step felt like a declaration of independence, a rejection of the role imposed upon her by a society that valued appearance over authenticity. As she drove away from the estate, the city lights receded into the distance, replaced by the vast, uncharted horizon of possibility. Aisha's heart, though heavy with sorrow, beat with a newfound rhythm, one that promised that her future would be defined by her own choices, not by the expectations of others. In the quiet solitude of her modest new apartment, the walls bare and the space unadorned, Aisha began to rebuild herself. Here, in the gentle glow of morning, she allowed herself to grieve for the love that had been lost and to honor the lessons learned from betrayal. Every scar, every painful memory, was transformed into a stepping stone toward a life lived fully and authentically. She started to write again, pouring her heart into words that celebrated the strength and resilience that had carried her through the darkest nights. Days turned into weeks, and as the initial shock of walking away gave way to a steady resolve, Aisha discovered that the void left behind was not one of emptiness, but of immense possibility. The freedom of being unburdened by expectations allowed her to reconnect with her passions, her creativity, and the dreams that had long lain dormant. In time, She built a life that was not defined by the opulent, hollow performance of her past, but by genuine connections, honest work, and the deep, abiding love she finally found for herself. Her journey was not without setbacks. There were days of loneliness, moments when the memories of a promised love would sting like the chill of a winter's wind. But with each passing day, Aisha's determination grew stronger. She learned to trust her instincts, to honor her voice, and to celebrate the strength of a woman who had dared to defy a destiny not chosen. And in those quiet moments, when the night was at its darkest and the stars whispered of hope, she would smile, knowing that she had reclaimed her story. As the final chapter of that tumultuous saga closed, Aisha looked back not with regret, but with gratitude for the lessons learned. The painful memories, the whispered betrayals, and the cold confrontations had forged in her a new identity, one rooted in authenticity, courage, and the unwavering belief that true love begins with self-respect. Walking away was not an act of defeat, but a declaration of independence, a promise that she would never again allow anyone to define her worth. And so, as the sun rose on a new day, Aisha embraced the beauty of her freedom. The echoes of the past receded into gentle memories, and before her stretched a future that was bright, unpredictable, and entirely her own. In that final, transcendent moment, she realized that the end of one chapter was simply the beginning of another, a new story, one written in the ink of hope, resilience, and an unyielding commitment to live for herself. Thank you for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment below. Let me know your thoughts and what kind of stories you'd love to hear next. See you in the next one.